The switchboard is about the only person in the building who can't really to tell you to get lost, and shouldn't be too averse to answering your questions about who's in charge or who the best person to speak to about a particular thing is. And I think that can make a difference, because I've certainly seen in offices ideas languishing unused on one desk because they've been sent to the wrong person, and that person, I mean, obviously in an ideal world they would trot over to their colleague who does want it and pass it over, but we don't live in a personal world. I'm being handed a question here that's interesting, multitasking, which for me is quite difficult, which is somebody asking about, to the extent, the business model for publications, taking into account the role of the internet. I don't think that I've got a definitive answer in terms of the business model, other than the current climate. I hear different reports from different sectors of the business. So, for example, I mean, obviously a lot of staff journalists are being laid off at the moment by different organisations. Perversely, that may mean more freelance opportunities for that particular publication, and vice versa. It can also mean the credit crunch could have the impact of turning off freelance income. So, I mean, a lot depends on the business strategy of the business that you're actually dealing with, because one publisher might say, our solution is to pretty much cut all the freelancers and take it back to staff and stop doing getting outsiders in. And the other might say, well, let's cut the staff, and if we do, you've still got somebody to fill the pages. So, no single answer. Another aspect of the question is how much of the role of the internet sort of playing. I think also in terms of the actual journalism, because something that somebody asked earlier, and it's a bit of a problem for freelancers these days, was which rights are you giving away? And the problem for I think the newspaper end of the market is that most newspapers will want a feed that goes directly onto the net. An increasing number of our regional papers are actually launching, sort of reorganising their offices so that there's a media hub which organises news in a way that publishes digital first and foremost, and then passes on the news to other publications in the group and so on. The implication for some freelancers, I mean, not necessarily on all features issues, but for some freelancers, is that obviously a publication that is pretty much simultaneously publishing on the web and as in print is going to want universal rights, so that very few organisations have got the personnel that somebody like the BBC has to literally chase up who's using what and what's copyright and what's got access and what has to be paid for again. Most papers just don't have that kind of resources. So I think we're going to see more situations of papers, pretty much wanting to pay one-off fee for universal use in whichever way, shape they see fit, because they simply probably don't have the choice to differentiate online between an article that they has got different rights sitting on it and can only be used in certain circumstances. That's potentially obviously bad news for the freelance who's wanting perhaps to minimise the way that an article's used without payment and get more payment for its reuse. But possibly the pattern will change to the extent that there's the work sold in a different way. I think that will gradually, I mean, this is purely personal, so, and also there are different models sort of emerging, because there's a lot of, for example, there's a new breed of digital broadcasting which is much closer to, web broadcasting, which is much closer to TV, and therefore governed more by TV disciplines than newspapers. It's also an interesting issue. I don't want to, because I'm not an expert on the subject, and don't want to get bogged down in intellectual property rights here, but you would have seen a lot of publicity generally about both musicians and cinemas and so on, who are very concerned about the ability of social networking sites and so on, like YouTube and so on, to disseminate material without people getting their royalties. And in fact, a number of companies are initiating prosecutions of under copyright law to prevent that. So this is, quite a complicated sort of worldwide issue at the moment of, how do you protect your work, especially in an online environment. And that's something that, for example, photographers are particularly, worried about.